I don't think Tony Fauci is going to be sending me a Christmas card this year. We had massive disagreements through the entire course of the last 4 years. And look, I think he gave a lot of bad advice. I think he was involved, regardless of what you think of his positions, insisting schools shut down for nearly 2 years, shutting kids out of school, pushing COVID vaccine mandates, pushing COVID vaccine boosters in young, healthy individuals, not talking about the risks of myocarditis or any other evidence of vaccine injury, censoring Americans, pushing cloth masks, giving people a false sense of security. All the areas where we disagreed. Put that aside. We can have a disagreement. We should have an open discourse on those things. One thing that's extremely obvious that very few people realize, and certainly hardly anyone in the medical establishment where I come from realized, is that he was involved in a massive cover-up of the origins of COVID, a massive cover-up. Whether or not he was involved in the experiments or funding the experiments that led to the origins of COVID, he was clearly 100% involved in the cover-up, and that all came out in the film Thank You, Dr. Fauci, which goes through it all.
And particularly there was the letter in The Lancet, which Dr. Fauci's kind of proxy, a man called Peter Daszak, who ran this bizarre little nonprofit called Eco Health Alliance, which was sort of the cutout for doing that Frankenstein gain-of-function research in China, in Wuhan, after it was banned in America for a short time. And Dr. Fauci was, we know now, involved in the writing of that letter and making sure that it was published. What went wrong with the whole medical establishment? And I'm talking about The Lancet. I'm talking about during the 2020, we'd all been locked down, and then suddenly in the summer of 2020, we have 1,300 medical people, including epidemiologists, writing an open letter saying, oh, it's quite okay to go and join mass gatherings if it comes to BLM protests because, racial equity is so much more important than sheltering in place from COVID, which just sort of surprised everybody. What went wrong?
Yeah, I'm just smiling because they did beclown themselves when they said a campaign event was a massive super spreader event, but if it was for a different purpose that they believed was noble, then it was entirely okay and safe. Look, I think our society has engaged in a toxic polarization of every issue now, the echo chambers of social media, the affirming news that sort of spins people up into a rage. And that's going on in the broader society now, where if you disagree, it's no longer a healthy disagreement where you can just be frustrated with the other person. It's now censor them, silence them, dismiss them, get them fired, lock them up in jail. That is a very toxic level of polarization we really just have not seen in the modern era. And unfortunately, it's crossed over into medicine, into the healthy dialogue we as physicians had, that we had at Johns Hopkins, that Jay Bhattacharya had at Stanford, that my colleagues at Harvard when I was there. We would have these disagreements, but only recently did Anthony Fauci take it to the next level of using science as political propaganda. He commissioned the pieces that lied about the COVID origins. The author who submitted the article said this was commissioned by Dr. Fauci and Dr. Collins in that cover letter. Again, you go through the emergency calls he had. So if you think back to the end of January, just before COVID became a thing in the news in the United States, January, February, what was Dr. Fauci doing? He was frantically engaging in a massive cover-up with 3 a.m. emails and phone calls. He was convening people, and the notes from those meetings reveal that all these virologists he convened had told him, we think it came from the Wuhan lab. And the output was, days later, those same scientists wrote a letter in the medical journal saying it definitely did not come from the lab. And they went on to receive, some of them, millions of dollars in funding from Fauci's agency. It's not right. This is not rocket science. It's a no-brainer where it came from. The researchers in the Wuhan lab sent a grant proposal in 2008 to the United States government saying, this is what we would like to do. It's called the diffuse grant. You're very familiar with it. Hardly ever covered in the media. And the diffuse grant said, the Wuhan lab researchers, the Wuhan lab researchers would like to take a bat coronavirus and insert a furin cleavage site to enable this virus to infect humans. And you think, well, what a bunch of mad scientists. Why would you do that? And there's this fantasy idea that Collins and Fauci had promoted from, the dinosaur age, where they thought, oh, if you Frankenstein a terrible virus, then you could maybe help find a cure to it. Well, just stop doing it. You're more likely to cause a pandemic than you are to prevent one. And unfortunately, that's the lesson.
And so that was the motivation, was it, that Anthony Fauci and Francis Collins, who we don't talk about enough, but he was Fauci's boss, they were fixated on this idea that they could get a vaccine out of doing these Frankenstein experiments. Is that what it was? And then they were arrogantly angry when a bunch of scientists who were concerned about the health effects, the dangers of that, managed to get the Obama administration to put a moratorium on that research. So they outsourced. Have I summarized that correctly?
Yeah, and this gets really dark. I mean, spiritually dark, Miranda, is that scientists, after watching an experiment that in part was done overseas and in part in Wisconsin years ago, years before COVID, they infected ferrets, a known animal model for viral transmission. And they created a sort of super influenza virus and infected all these ferrets, and they published the article.
Right.
And the scientific community worldwide read this article, and they basically said, and I'm kind of paraphrasing the response, what the hell did you just do? No one should ever do this. This is extremely dangerous. And so the scientific community lobbied the Obama administration to ban this gain-of-function research, saying it's extremely dangerous. Well, they created all these rules at the time. And so Collins and Fauci meticulously worked in their bureaucratic ways to water down the power of the oversight committee of gain-of-function research, to get grants to go around the research, around the committee, by saying that it wasn't quite gain-of-function research. They changed the definition. They did everything you could do bureaucratically.
Fauci did that in Congress when he was being asked questions by Rand Paul. He just changed the definition.
That's right. He parsed his words to basically lie to Congress, and it's so obvious right now. So it's an American tragedy. What I'm shocked by, coming from the faculty at Johns Hopkins, is none of my colleagues knew any of this. Oh, really? There was a propaganda piece published in Lancet that Fauci commissioned. Oh, really? They had emergency meetings. Oh, they had the diffuse grant, and it was received by the U.S. government, was the cookbook on how to make COVID. The Wuhan lab sent it over and said, hey, well, this is what we want to do. And then it happens, and we have no idea. We think it came from some random wet lab, and the epicenter of the world happens to be 5 miles away. I could not believe that my colleagues had no idea of the origins and the facts surrounding the origins and the massive cover-up that Fauci and Collins led. And let's be honest, there's a allegiance to them. They are, as you kind of opened saying, they are patron saints, right? They have achieved sainthood, and they have tremendous power. So a lot of
money, all the grants.
Oh, I had infectious diseases colleagues across the country tell me, gosh, you're so right on all this stuff. I'm glad you're speaking up. And I'd say, why don't you speak up?
Yeah.
And they say, well, I get so much funding, or I have a grant in front of Fauci's institute, or, the NIH feeds every university in the United States. It feeds them and sets the research agenda. And the research agenda in American medicine for the last 20 years has been the research agenda of Fauci and Collins. Right. And that is Frankenstein, these viruses. Why aren't we funding food as medicine and the microbiome and understanding school lunch programs? Why are we funding a lab in China? First of all, doesn't China have enough money to fund their own research? And why are we funding these dangerous experiments?
Your predecessor, I believe, said that the biggest problem facing the FDA was misinformation.
Yeah, that's right. He said the number one cause of death in the U.S. was misinformation.
Really?
And he said his number one goal was to fight misinformation.
What did he mean by that? People not taking the mRNA vaccine for COVID?
Oh, he was a staunch proponent of the mRNA vaccine and COVID vaccines every year in perpetuity for all Americans, regardless of your risk. And the ultimate, I think, original sin of Fauci and that whole crew was that they failed to recognize the 10,000-fold risk difference between an older individual with a comorbid condition and a young, healthy child. And so schools were shut down while bowling alleys were and bars were open. You couldn't have a funeral or get married, even though they were young, healthy individuals. You couldn't do things outside because you were being disobedient.
And also, apparently, the FDA sat on some, pre-you, obviously, during the Biden administration, sat on some research that showed that there was a huge risk for teenage boys of taking the vaccine.
Yeah, the heart complication.
mRNA.
Yeah, myocarditis. So we discovered that after we came here. They sat on data on the myocarditis risk. And the tragedy is thousands of American kids got myocarditis.
That's criminal.
It was entirely avoidable.
Right.
You could have just said, hey, we don't know if you need 2 doses, or space the doses out, or 1, or you could have been honest that we don't know if any young, healthy kid has died of COVID. We still don't know.
Does the COVID-19 vaccine, the mRNA vaccine, does it work?
I think it depends on the time and the risk of the individual. So when it first came out, it was a good match for the circulating strain at the time.
Right.
And it did reduce the severity of illness in high-risk individuals, for sure. We saw that. We saw the clinical benefit. But over time, natural immunity became ubiquitous. You saw that it wasn't a good match for other strains that were circulating. But there was this sort of desperation, rather than talk about obesity as the leading modifiable risk factor. We told people to, stay in their homes. They put on 15 pounds of weight. We said, just get a COVID vaccine every Monday morning when you show up at work or something. You cannot keep that transient, marginal, incremental protective effect that lasts maybe 3 months, then it goes to a baseline, though. You can't keep taking it every 3 months.
And the psychic damage to kids, especially not being able to go to school. I mean, you're seeing now that cohort that was damaged, that went backwards in learning, but also psychologically seemed to become very strange.
Our public health officials treated children like a biohazard, not as a beautiful, living human being.
Teachers did too.
All the unions. And the irony is the American Academy of Pediatrics initially said, we got to keep the schools open. It's important for the psychological development of children. And the second President Trump said the same thing, they flipped on their position.
Right.
And so Trump derangement syndrome is a real thing. We're working on a medication for it. But I don't think it will work if it gets approved for stage 4 terminal TDS.
Yes, it is really an ailment. And that was how I first learned about you. Obviously not TDS, but the opposite. In March, was it March or May of 2020, you wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal and you said the opposite of what everyone else was saying. You said, we need to keep the colleges open. This virus is not very dangerous to young people or to the faculty. First of all, what gave you the courage to go public and say that you were one of the first and only, and what kind of feedback and backlash did you get?
So that was a piece I wrote in the New York Times, actually.
Oh, was it? Yeah.
And it was titled, "We Need to Reopen Safely." And it talked about how we have to treat children differently from older individuals, and the importance of living life and the risk of what we call excess mortality. That is, people dying from the nutritional deprivation of not going to school to get their meals. Remember, most of America lives paycheck to paycheck, not like the people in the academic ivory towers of medicine. And so were totally disconnected from what shutting kids out of school meant in inner city Baltimore. Now, for their kids, because they're wealthy, they go to the country clubs, they break the rules at the French Laundry. Right. They have their own rules whereby they have their private tutors. Their kids are still learning.
Lovely COVID, yeah.
Yeah, it was, just go to work on Zoom in your pajamas, right? It was, but for kids in inner city Baltimore, where I was practicing, it was brutal. It was relentless Tell a kid in inner city Baltimore where the corners on the streets are very dangerous, hey, just take this iPad and go home. Many kids never came back to school. The dropout rates were already some of the highest in the country. My predecessor was basically just on the bandwagon of the solution to COVID is just nonstop, perpetual advocating for vaccines. He said fighting misinformation was his top priority. My top priority at the FDA is more cures and meaningful treatments for the American people and healthier food for children. And we're delivering on that.
So talk about food. What have you done? I think you're upending the food pyramid now.
Yeah, the food pyramid, you talk about misinformation. I mean, the food pyramid was some of the most damaging misinformation written by the food industry, not because the foods were what you should eat, but because it's what they wanted you to buy. The medical profession was entirely corrupted. Nutrition science is one of the most corrupted of all disciplines within the medical science. And so you had things on there like the demonization of natural saturated fats. And all the schools then were on this rampage to remove fat from milk,
right?
As if that makes it healthier.
And no butter, just margarine, with all sorts of things.
A crazy chemical combination, which is like this fake butter. And so you had schools ironically removing fat and then adding sugar to their milk. They had ultra processed foods to the point where 60 to 70% of a kid's calories now are ultra processed foods. No one talked about it. Ultra processed foods weren't even mentioned in the food pyramid.
And is that directly related to the rise in obesity?
Oh yeah. When you take fat out of a food, it has zero flavor. So you have to add carbohydrates in. And the modern ultra processed carbohydrates allowed companies to pound a food, be it a snack well or a bar or whatever, somebody with these chemicals, to the point where you turn the label and there's 50 ingredients and you're like, what? And what happened was we failed to recognize as a medical profession that all these chemicals are causing an inflammatory reaction in the gut. And the body is sort of rejecting it, but not in a sudden rejection, like after a liver transplant, you can go into rejection. It was a slow rejection. And when you have inflammation of any tube in the body, be it a gallbladder or a segment of bowel or the ureter, people think kidney stones hurt so much because of the jagged edges of the stones. No, that's not correct. It's because of the stretching of the ureter when it's obstructed. Stretching and inflammation is intense pain. So what are we doing to kids? They take all these chemicals, they get a reaction, and they increase their inflammatory state. And the GI tract is inflamed, and it manifests as the kids not feeling well, being sad. And what do? We drug our nation's kids at scale. We wake them up in the middle of the night, not because it's good for their natural circadian rhythms, but because it's convenient for adults going to work. We hit them with ultra-processed foods. Their insulin levels surge to levels never seen before in the human race.
Really?
We hit them again. And they get snacks during the day that are junk food. I never had snacks between classes. Now they have snack lists. They go to lunch. They hit them hard again with refined carbohydrates stripped of their fiber.
Right.
So they're chopped up. They function like sugar. And then they are drowsy and they can't sit still at a desk for 7 hours with less natural light than most inmates in a federal penitentiary.
Right.
And they're under these fluorescent bulbs and they're sitting in these classes and they can't pay attention. And what do we do as a society? We drug them at scale.